I do think Russia could go kinetic and could go for an all-out attack. Just, it's such a mess in Europe. Trump is walking away. Let's go and let's smash into the store. It's a ram raid. Let's do it. And they'll probably do it. I think they'll ramp up to that within 18 months.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio. I'm Louis Sykes. Today we're joined by Robert Fox, the defence editor at the London Standard and contributor to the iPaper. Robert, thank you very much for joining me today.
Hello, yeah.
Well, Russian attacks on Ukraine have continued, air attacks in response following these drone strikes on Russian bombers. We understand though that, as much as they've piled up so far, they've not culminated yet. What more do you think we might expect from Russia in retaliation to those attacks?
Well, I think that there's the propaganda, as you say. They've got to show that they're still capable in the air, and there's no doubt that it was a big blow. And the way that they could take out up to 40 strategic bombers and other aircraft, it's not clear what the sum is. That the Pentagon now very much under Hegseth says, it's really half that number. But it was a terrific strike and very well organized, and so they've continued taking out 2 or 3 aircraft here and there. But watch it, they're taking out fuel and communication dumps now, and it's quite clear that the Zelensky-Syrsky strategy has been very well thought out. They've got to hold it on the ground, which they're doing with difficulty, as we're in the middle of what is quite clearly a big summer offensive by Russia, where Russia, for all the cant about how they were developing a new kind of warfare under Gerasimov, still the commander-in-chief, Mark Galeotti and others were saying completely new, different war, psychological, now you see me, now you don't. We don't really see troops. We see little green men taking over Crimea, but then after Crimea, it's same old, same old. And the tactics that Russia is using on the ground, as several have been pointing out, it had been at least as expensive and crude as those of Marshal Zhukov in the latter stages of the Great Patriotic War, 44 to 45, after they'd recovered after pushing the Germans back from Stalingrad, and it was just numbers. A lot of cheap armor, the very successful T-34. We don't want to go to a lot of good air, very cheap close support, but cheaper still, of course, is the human life. It was an amazingly costly war. That's what's relevant to what's going on in eastern Ukraine at the moment. It is amazingly costly, because I think it's a pretty conservative figure that 1.4 million have been taken off the battlefield. That's killed, missing in action, prisoners, and seriously injured, irreplaceable, at a ratio of about 1:40 to 60 on the Ukrainian side. The 40, about 400,000. It's very, very costly because 6 million have been uprooted and possibly even fled. They're very cautious about their numbers. But for Russia now to have a butcher's bill of over 1 million, which seems to be pointing to, that's quite a chiller, and it is very interesting to see whether Putin's generals, and particularly the gang round him, of which Shoigu, the former defense minister, now secretary to the Security Council, is looking to be so important. Can they really afford this expense?
And as you say, that there are more of these drone attacks going on. Just today, there's been an attack on
Huge.
An electronic warfare factory inside Russia. How much are the Kremlin going to be worried that this could be the start of an even wider drone campaign against the Russian military, behind the lines?
I think it's the breadth of quality rather than quantity, which is so interesting, because it's very interesting when they did the weekend attack on the 4 sites as far east as Irkutsk, going up to Siberia, that it was just so surprising. And what was so surprising is how clever the Ukrainian command was, particularly the psychological warfare command, in saying, look, we're not going to get away with trying to cover this up and say it wasn't us. And they revealed an awful lot of how it was done. And they caught the Russians by surprise and screwed up a whole lot of the motorway heavy truck TIR transportation system across whole swathes of Russia. Again, that is a big victory, the propaganda victory through social media. And what they're saying, hey, Russia, we're not going to be suckers that way again. Just watch out and see what different we're going to do. They did have a go at the Kerch Bridge the Sea of Azov, very important, very importantly, did some damage, but didn't get through. They were using massive devices, 2,500 kilo devices, but the Russians had enforced it. But the North Black Sea along there, the naval war that they have been winning without having a navy of their own, um, is going to be very, very prominent indeed. Um, I think that what Zelensky and his commanders must now be thinking, who's going to come to our aid? They're not going to rely on Trump. They're going to rely on the goodwill of the American people, and they're going to rely on a lot of good allies around America, particularly Canada, which has a very large Ukrainian population. I think that they will be wary because this is also one of the main thrusts of the stratagems of Putin, which is to break up NATO and to have the Canadians quarreling with the Americans, with the Brits, with their thumbs up their backside, not really knowing what to do, having been very effective before. But the Starmer leadership, frankly, from where we're speaking now, seems thoroughly confused. And it's not clear really what they aim to do in the medium to long term from the recent Strategic Defence Review. France being France, where Sarkozy, Sarkozy, but Macron, that's a good Freudian slip, but they're the same. You see, you have Jupiter in France with the president, and they will lead Germany, very important, the Nordics, very important, and I'm not just going through the list. Italy, I think, with Meloni is going to be very important, and they're going to discount to trade, which is very difficult for Ukraine. Discount the importance and influence, particularly of Poland now. They're going to watch Poland. Poland can do a lot of things, but there will be very heavy psychological warfare, information warfare on Poland. Look, chum, if we believe what your neighbours in the Baltic states are saying and what we're saying to you, you can't dial out of this one because you're next. And you may be so next, you're probably even now, more than you realize, under threat from Russia. It's an absolutely fascinating build, but you can see this is middle late period Putin, Peter the Great, ground initiative to bring Russia back as the premier, not a premier, the premier European military power. And it is slightly bonkers if I put it like that, but so it is.
Exactly, and I do want to come on to that NATO meeting or NATO announcement today in a moment. But just focusing still on Ukraine, obviously the missile attacks continued overnight. Ukraine claimed that only 10 of hundreds of missiles overnight actually managed to get to their targets, but that doesn't necessarily reflect the wider issue they face in the air, does it? I mean, they're complaining. Kiev's complaining that Trump has diverted air defense components to the Middle East. Is that just, as you say, unreliable Trump, not a great ally of Ukraine, or actually is there a bit of a change in defense focus on the US behind that?
No, it's sort of Bart Simpson, Trump, roller skating through the chaos of history because he doesn't know what to do next. I mean, it is a very difficult call. Just to be practical, where we are and granular, to have called out the National Guard, the military, or when they were not wanted or required by the governor in the fifth economy of the world in California. That's a big thing, and to be diverted with was always going to be there. And I suspect Trump knew it was going to be there. But I think Iran is a big, big issue for him now as we speak, because the Supreme Leader and the Council of Guardians have issued their terms in the talks, and they're the terms that really amount to nothing at all. And Trump is under immense pressure, particularly as Iran is saying it's not going to give up refinement and the production of nuclear fuels, and one suspects going on with the missile and the nuclear weaponry program. This is the inference we have to draw from the latest very gloomy reports from the IAEA. They just said they couldn't get into at least three of the really key strategic sites. Goodness knows what is going on there, and they're not coming down. They're not coming down from their uranium enrichment program. They've got up to 60%, and you have to get about to 90% for serious nuclear weapons, but they think that they developed prototypes already, very likely. and they're not coming back from that significantly. And I think that this is where Netanyahu is saying, where again you have to say he's been consistent. You're going to have to do it now, because if you leave it much later, it's going to be too late.
And I just want to come back one last time to on the ground in Ukraine. We've
Yeah.
seen the Russian tanks now, or Russia claims their tanks are now advancing into Dnipropetrovsk. Uh, what's the idea there? Because Russia doesn't even legally claim that oblast in Ukraine.
Well, I think this is the battlefield dictated by geography, and it's the old suggestion back to 2022, and was around at the time of those Istanbul talks, was that they'll go up to the Dnipro at least. And I think the Dnipro line, and there's a lot to fill in behind, but they do have a lot of forces now. They have almost 2/3 of a million in and around, and available. How well they're supplied they are, and that will be a main effort: electronics, bombs, aircraft, but also supplied food and fuel, going to the front, that the Ukrainians will really have to go at with their rocket attacks. Ukrainian air, it's not terrific. It's building up. There have been very strong allies, though goodness knows where they are politically now, like the Netherlands and Belgium with the F-16s. I think there must be a great redrawing going on, and where we will know, even if there's a huge donut-like hole of silence in the middle of it, is the NATO head of government's big summit. We all say that they're big, in The Hague from the 24th to 25th of June. This will define it, because Trump, I think, will show that he really is a weak ally, and that he's weak in the head about this. There's no strategic vision. I mean, if we're going to have a coalition of Hegseth, of J.D. Vance, Rubio, and people like Elbridge Colby, who seems to be the strategist behind Hegseth, what are they really going to do? What does Europe really mean to them? And of course, the real danger is that medium long term, again, the countries that will be looking for advantage out of this, which is really ominous, are China. Obviously, I'm going to say Iran, but it's actually China and Pakistan. Pakistan is being heavily rearmed, had some successes. Had some successes against the Russia-French armed India. Really didn't do too well in the recent uh, fight, and it was a real fight. Small exchange, small war, and we're going to see a lot of them against India. So we will get a redefining of NATO, and NATO has to redefine itself in terms of particularly its European imperative. What parts of Europe and the Euro-Atlantic area does it prioritize? And it won't get away with saying it's the Central Front, it's the marches of Ukraine, the old Duchy of Lithuania, because we have to see it spreading well beyond Ukraine now, down through the Caucasus, Moldova, the Baltics, who are getting very worried, Finland and Sweden. That's the ancient history, or the ancient late medieval history that Putin so loved. But for NATO, the southern flank are going to be talking a lot. I think the Italians, whose diplomacy is much more together than most people realize, will put a price. We are doing very important things for the security of Europe, particularly on the migration issue and where we stand, with Albania and with energy and with North Africa, and you cannot leave that out. And this is also where actually Trump is very weak, and will be accused by history of gross dereliction of duty.
And I want to dig more into NATO and some of those announcements that have been made by Secretary General Mark Rutte today. His headline announcement in London today was this 400% increase in missile defences. Can NATO and its European allies do that in time, do you think, before there might be this showdown with the Russians he's also warned of?
No, quite
Where,
simply no.
where does that leave them
Um,
then?
that leaves them in a terrible mess because, you know, with the briefings of the Strategic Defence Review, this was the thing: is that people from the government, the British government, were practically going with their whispering behind cushions over their faces. Don't talk about integrated air and missile defence. Don't talk about that. So, of course, and my colleagues said, "What you got to do about it?" Oh well, we can't afford things like Iron Dome because it's very local. We need about 5 or 6 iron domes for the strategic industrial areas of the UK. True. Can we do something like the Golden Dome, which is a bit of fantasy, I think, on the part of Trump, because it would be very, very expensive, more fantastical than the Star Wars system that Ronald Reagan very successfully prosecuted, but it was as a piece of propaganda. But something's got to be done about it because I had just very quickly to show where we are to answer your question too. When asked about this, what are you going to do about it? You know, oh, we'll put the Type 45 destroyer. Now, just to explain to folks again, it's getting quite old, the Type 45. There are only 6 of them. 2 of them don't really work properly anyway, for all kinds of reasons, but it has a mighty, wonderful radar. The Samson radar system, which is upgraded, has been very, very powerful. It's only now being superseded by American radars. That's why the Americans tend to like having one Type 45 around in the Mediterranean facing the Houthis. By the way, that's what that's about, because you can see huge areas with it. And unlike the Danish system, which they found falling apart, it worked really pretty well, as far as I can make out, in the Gulf and the Red Sea. Now, you cannot rely entirely on that for missile air defense over Western Europe, the Western and Eastern approaches to the UK, which are a strategic hub. But then you can hear Sakir saying, "Oh, Rachel from accounts, what are we going to do?" Well, the minimum amount is 10 billion, and they're not going to find it. And it is absolutely clear that that the bureaucrats, the civil servants with the Defence Review, won a completely Pyrrhic victory. They got the modest increase. They put the soldiers back in their box, so they're not going to spend extravagantly. And actually, everything, so much of what Britain is saying it can do for its allies, primarily NATO, and with America, and with its ASEAN colleagues in the Indo-Pacific, is a promissory note. We haven't got enough forces. A lot of the kit is completely out of date. And Rachel from accounts does not want to pony up the money because Britain, I could go off on one in here in a minute because I think it's a very important part that was totally missing from the Defence Review, is that we can contemplate spending soon in 2 years more than in the increase in the welfare budget in the UK than the total defence budget. Sorry, that's a bit complicated. It's about 70 billion of the extra money that's gone towards it, and it's going to get worse. This is the hole that keeps on digging itself because, and it affects recruiting and manpower and resilience and community protection and homeland defense. How can you motivate an increasingly aging population? In the Defence Review, and watch out in the National Security Strategy, I can guarantee there is, it's like Hamlet without the prince, as the famous saying was from Theatreland. It's going to be a British defence policy without the British people. And this comes back to, I know I've gone round the houses here, but back to your air defense, air and missile defense. That is the problem. What is your problem? Deal with it. It was a famous recipe in Victorian times for jugged hare, which, the apocryphal line, actually, I've looked up the recipe, it doesn't say it, but do you know what the first line if you're going to make jugged hare? First catch your hare. First catch your hare. And I don't think that they're doing that at the moment because you've got this very risk averse culture in public administration. I think something will break because there is something in the temperament of people as diverse as funny. I mentioned 2 women here, Kasia Kallas of the EU and Georgia Maloney. if that they are bright enough, sharp enough, and self-confident enough to say, if it ain't working now, we've got to do something different, and we've probably got to go about it a very different way. But the problem with both with all of them, with Macron and Starmer, and to an extent Scholz, it's how to mobilize public opinion, support in their country at the moment. Um, there is also a denial, which is saying we're not really in such difficulty anyway, despite the volume of cyber attack. And what I fear, having seen the crudity of tactics, battle tactics, as described, Marshal Zhukov in Ukraine, I do think Russia, I think the warning from the Baltics and the Poles and the Finns are right. I do think Russia could go kinetic and could go for an all out attack. Just, it's such a mess in Europe. Trump is walking away. Let's go and let's smash into the store. It's a ram raid. Let's do it. And they'll probably do it. I think they'll ramp up to that within 18 months.
Well, I want to come more onto that wider European threat, but one small detail I did notice out of Mark Rutte's visit to London today was that he said that Ukraine is still on the path to NATO. Now, that seems like a very, very long path, given that this promise was made
Yeah.
quite some time ago. But it's significant, isn't it, that he's still with that idea, given that it's not part of America's idea of how peace is going to come to Ukraine.
Even compared with their generation different, but with Musculus particularly, that Mark Rutte is a very, very experienced European politician. We've been blessed with that because we've had the Scandinavians, the Norwegians, Stoltenberg from a great dynasty. Not that Rutte is. Rutte was prime minister in a very, very difficult country, but perhaps one of the most sophisticated in the world, in the Netherlands. So he doesn't do these things carelessly. I think that he said that to serve notice to the new president-elect in Poland, who said also today, "I can't see Ukraine should come to NATO." And what he was putting a marker down, I am representing opinion, the body of opinion in NATO, and this would go to the North Atlantic Council because we are a democratic alliance with our assembly, and Ukraine is not going to be outside NATO, and this is actually serving notice to Putin. Above all, we are not going to abandon Ukraine. I think it's going to be very interesting how it appears. I think it's a very, very, very dangerous moment because if Putin decides really to ramp up, and he shows signs of doing it, with throwing even more material, such that he has, but also manpower, and it is mostly men, into the field, it is make or break, and it's make or break, I think, by October. And we'll see the way it goes, but it could be a terrible mess between now, as we speak, and then, because I think this is why Rutte said what he has said in London today, to give a clear roadmap as to where we go forward. This is what we're aiming to do. This is what NATO needs to do. What he is really saying, and that's why he said it in London, get serious about defence with your glossy, lots of lovely pictures and big print defence review. I don't think you're getting serious yet.
How's Putin going to read into that sort of message coming out of NATO about Ukraine? I mean, I suppose my point there is that, even Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, will likely outlive Trump politically, won't he? So that's quite a blow for the Russians if NATO hasn't shifted on this, bringing Ukraine into NATO in the long term.
The way Putin will do it, and you will get a Simonian of RT, the whole gang, Peskov, the official spokesman, say, "There you are, told you so. Ukraine was always going to be part of NATO. This is the onward march." I was on a show with Sky Arabia, which is sort of not inimical, should I say, to the Moscow line, and it had somebody just blathering on that it was always NATO's intent to conquer Eastern Europe. Forget it. And that's what they'll say. And the reaction of of Putin is really not for us at all. It's actually for the domestic audience, and that it's just this tsunami of propaganda. It's the victim aggressor. That's why they'll put up with everything, and I think it's a miserable prospect for a lot of Russians, because Putin now realizes his whole destiny as a public figure is tied to this war, and he stays as long as the war stays.
Mm.
He thinks, yeah.
And as we said, as we were talking about a moment ago, Mark Rutte warned today that he feels we're at the most 5 years away with a possible wider confrontation with Russia. It sounds to me, Robert, that in your mind, that's actually a lot closer, that threat.
One has to be very careful here, because a lot of the commentariat, of which I suppose this is a part, loves sort of reading precedent and history in the past, and this is the way it goes. The mistake we make, and it's very interesting asking the best generals with operational experience about this, things like this are not linear in their development. They go by jerks and starts. They very rarely go back, and they explode suddenly and go off in another direction. So if we're on a grisly carpet towards a very big regional conflict in Europe, as Rutte seems to be suggesting, I don't think it's going to happen like that. I think it's going to take us all by surprise. And I think there could be a very nasty accident on the Kola Peninsula, for instance, in the corridor between the Baltics and Poland. It's just something very odd could happen like that. Putin, I think, has to be careful of the wider area of the Russian Federation. He's under pressure from China. There's a lot of pressure on the border, a lot of Chinese coming over, but you have to look to the Caucasus. You have to look at Moldova. He's putting a heavier footprint against the Finnish border and the Baltics, but particularly the Finnish border, these big camps within striking distance of the Finnish border. And of course, never say never, he can't give up on what was the golden goose's golden nest in sub-Saharan Africa, because he wants rare minerals from there. He's got plenty himself, but not sufficient. And so anything can happen. I'm wondering, though, how much Xi is saying you can go so far, because you're not going to muck up what I have as a strategy. And part of my strategy is still keeping my Western European market going.
Well, Robert Fox, thank you very much for joining me today on Frontline.
Okay.
Thank you for watching Frontline for Times Radio. For more on the war in Ukraine, you can sign up for membership at the link below or subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also listen to the latest news and analysis on Times Radio or read it on thetimes.com. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.